The night was unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale, silvery glow over the beach, its light reflecting off the gentle waves that lapped at the shore. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the only sounds were the distant cries of seagulls and the soft rustling of the wind through the dunes. It was the kind of night that should have been peaceful. But for Hazel, it was anything but. Hazel had always loved the beach at night. There was something about the way the moonlight danced on the water, the way the shadows stretched long and dark across the sand, that made her feel alive. It was a place where she could escape from the noise and chaos of her everyday life. A place where she could just be. But tonight, as she walked along the shore with her best friend Lily, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The two girls had been inseparable since childhood, their bond forged through years of shared secrets, laughter, and tears. They had spent countless nights like this, wandering the beach, talking about everything and nothing, their voices carried away by the wind. But tonight, there was a tension in the air that neither of them could quite put their finger on. It was as if the night itself was watching them, waiting for something to happen. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" Hazel asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She stopped walking and turned to look at Lily, her eyes scanning the darkness behind them. Lily laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, the kind that betrayed her own unease. "Don't be silly, Hazel. It's just us out here. Who would be watching us?" Hazel didn't answer. She couldn't explain why she felt the way she did, but the sensation was undeniable. It was as if there were eyes on her, hidden in the shadows, following her every move. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling, and forced a smile. "You're right. I'm probably just imagining things." But as they continued walking, the feeling only grew stronger. Hazel's heart began to race, her palms slick with sweat. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the endless stretch of sand and the distant glow of the moon. It wasn't until they reached the old lifeguard tower that Hazel's fears were realized. The tower was a crumbling relic of a bygone era, its wooden beams weathered and warped by years of exposure to the elements. It stood at the edge of the beach, a silent sentinel overlooking the water. As they approached, Hazel noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. "That's weird," Lily said, her voice tinged with unease. "I thought they locked this place up at night." Hazel didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the door, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could have opened it, and why? She took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "Maybe we should check it out," she said, her voice trembling. Lily hesitated, her eyes darting nervously between Hazel and the tower. "I don't know, Hazel. What if someone's in there?" "What if someone needs help?" Hazel countered, though she wasn't entirely convinced by her own argument. Still, her curiosity, or perhaps something darker, drove her forward. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The inside of the tower was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. Hazel fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight and casting a narrow beam of light into the darkness. The beam illuminated the interior of the tower, revealing a scene that made Hazel's blood run cold. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all of the same person, her. There were pictures of her walking to class, sitting in the park, even sleeping in her own bed. And in the center of it all, written in bold red letters, were the words, I'm always watching. Hazel's breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling with shock and horror. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping her phone. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "we need to go, now." But before Lily could respond, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging the tower into darkness once more. Hazel spun around, her heart pounding in her chest, and fumbled for the door handle. It was locked. She turned back to Lily, her eyes wide with fear. "We're trapped!" The sound of footsteps echoed through the tower, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere above them. Hazel's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and uneven, as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Who's there?" Lily called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, just the sound of the footsteps growing closer. Hazel's mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but the tower was a maze of narrow staircases and hidden corners, and she had no idea where the sound was coming from. Suddenly, the flashlight died, plunging them into complete darkness. Hazel let out a strangled cry, her hands shaking as she tried to turn it back on. But it was no use. The battery was dead. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then a voice, low and menacing, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here, Hazel." Hazel's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice. It was him, the man who had been following her for weeks, the one she had tried so hard to ignore. He had been watching her, stalking her, and now he had her trapped. "What do you want?" Hazel demanded, her voice shaking with fear. She could feel Lily's hand gripping hers, their fingers intertwined in a desperate attempt to find comfort in each other's presence. The man chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Hazel's spine. "I want you, Hazel. I've always wanted you, and now you're mine." Hazel's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. She knew they couldn't stay here, but the tower was a death trap, and the man was between them and the only exit. She had to do something, anything, to get them out of there. "Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "when I say run, you run. Don't look back, just get out of here." Lily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Hazel took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she lunged forward, shoving the man as hard as she could. He stumbled backward, caught off guard, and Hazel grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward the door. "Run!" Hazel screamed, her voice echoing through the tower. They burst through the door, the cool night air hitting them like a slap in the face. Hazel didn't look back, didn't dare to. She could hear the man's footsteps behind them, his breathing heavy and labored as he gave chase. They ran across the sand, their feet sinking into the soft surface with every step. Hazel's lungs burned, her legs aching with the effort, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She could hear the man gaining on them, his footsteps growing louder with every passing second. "Hazel, we're not going to make it," Lily cried, her voice filled with panic. Hazel glanced over her shoulder, her heart sinking as she saw the man closing the distance between them. He was fast, too fast. "Keep going," Hazel urged, her voice desperate. "We have to keep going." But it was no use. The man was upon them, his hand reaching out to grab Hazel's arm. She screamed, twisting away from him, but he was too strong. He yanked her backward, his grip like a vice, and she fell to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Lily turned, her eyes wide with terror, and without thinking, she launched herself at the man, clawing at his face with her nails. He roared in anger, releasing Hazel and turning his attention to Lily. Hazel scrambled to her feet, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way to save her friend. But before she could do anything, the man struck Lily across the face, the force of the blow sending her sprawling to the ground. Hazel's heart shattered as she saw her best friend lying there, unmoving, blood trickling from her temple. "Lily!" Hazel screamed, her voice filled with anguish. She rushed to her friend's side, dropping to her knees and cradling Lily's head in her lap. "Please wake up, please." The man stood over them, his breathing heavy, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "You should have stayed in the tower, Hazel," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Now you'll both pay for your disobedience." Hazel's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of fear and desperation. She knew she had to do something, but what? The man was too strong, too fast. She couldn't fight him, and she couldn't run, not without Lily. But then, as if by some miracle, Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at Hazel, her gaze filled with pain and confusion. "Hazel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Run!" Hazel shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not leaving you." But Lily's eyes were already closing again, her body going limp in Hazel's arms. Hazel's heart broke as she realized that her best friend was gone, taken from her by the monster standing over them. The man reached down, grabbing Hazel by the arm and yanking her to her feet. She struggled against him, her fists pounding against his chest, but it was no use. He was too strong. "You're mine now, Hazel," he said, his voice filled with a twisted sense of triumph, "and no one is going to save you." Hazel's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of fear and desperation. She knew she had to do something, but what? The man was too strong, too fast. She couldn't fight him, and she couldn't run, not without Lily. But then, as if by some miracle, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hey, what's going on over there?" The man froze, his grip on Hazel tightening as he turned to look in the direction of the voice. Hazel's heart leaped with hope as she saw a figure emerging from the shadows. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a flashlight in his hand. "Let her go," the man shouted, his voice filled with authority. The stalker hesitated, his eyes darting between Hazel and the newcomer. For a moment, it seemed like he might fight, but then, with a growl of frustration, he released Hazel and turned, disappearing into the darkness. Hazel collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with relief and exhaustion. The man rushed to her side, dropping to his knees and placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Hazel nodded, though she was far from okay. Her mind was still reeling from the events of the night, her heart aching with the loss of her best friend. She looked up at the man, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man nodded, his expression grim. "We need to get you out of here," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" Hazel nodded again, though her legs felt like jelly. She leaned on the man for support as they made their way back to the parking lot, her mind still racing with thoughts of what had just happened. But as they reached the safety of the car, Hazel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The man who had been stalking her was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next opportunity. And Hazel knew that she would never truly be safe until he was caught. As they drove away from the beach, Hazel couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man's face staring back at her from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the endless stretch of sand and the distant glow of the moon. And yet, the feeling of being watched remained, a constant, gnawing presence in the back of her mind. Hazel knew that she would never be able to escape it, not completely. The man had marked her, claimed her as his own, and no matter how far she ran, he would always be there, waiting in the shadows, ready to strike. The night was still, the world holding its breath once more. But for Hazel, the nightmare was far from over. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale of terror and suspense, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And remember, the shadows are always watching, the night is never as quiet as it seems, and danger can lurk where you least expect it. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and keep the lights on. Good night.